Happy Monday and welcome to the Catalyst for Change podcast, where we help leaders lead better. I'm Zach, your host, and I'm just so excited to welcome Josiah and Micah Kennealy to the podcast today. Josiah and Micah, how are you today?
Oh my gosh, Zach, thanks for having us. We're doing great.
Yeah.
Excited to be with you. We just honor you. We love you. And we're so grateful to spend some time together.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you guys taking the time today to just spend with us. I'll give the listeners just a little bit of background about you. So you guys are both the founders of the Young Adults Today nonprofit. Together, you co-host the Young Adults Today podcast, which is designed for equipping individuals who are leading and volunteering with young adult ministries, college campuses, and churches. But you also host the FYI podcast, which is still fairly new, I guess, at this point, which is designed to just answer the questions that young adults are asking today while pointing them to the Word of God and the heart of Christ. And you guys also lead the Minnesota Young Adults, which is a part of the Assemblies of God there in Minnesota, the Minnesota District Council. So you guys have led young adult ministries in church setting, on the college campus, and now you're leading Young Adults Today. So you guys are just incredibly busy and immersed in all things young adults.
Yes, that is very true.
Short and sweet. That's what you guys do. So let's kind of get started here a little bit. Can you guys just tell us a little bit more about young adults today and what do you guys do? Just kind of share, like, what's your heart? What does your life look like? What is Young Adults Today about?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing to keep in mind as like the listener, whether you're in the marketplace or you're leading a ministry, is when you are on a campus, meaning like you're working with young adults, you realize on a college campus, you're going to them. So it's like a mission field, like a scavenger hunt every day. But when you're in the church setting, you're inviting people into your doors. So it's a whole different like reverse of like mental thought and shift of how do you reach people and why do we do what we do? And it comes actually from Psalms 145:4. And I'll just read it right here. It says, "One generation commands your works to another. They are responsible for a telling of your mighty acts." So we feel like it's our responsibility to tell the next generations about the love of Jesus, the hope of Jesus, the things that he has. So we do it through two different avenues, essentially, that Josiah can break down. One is for the leader at large, increasing their leadership, as well as the young adult themselves. We define it as the 18 to 30. So two different demographics, but within the same bloodstream, I should say.
Yeah. And if you're an entrepreneur or leader listening or viewing, like you get this, that sometimes you have two, like you have one mission, of course, one vision, but two strategies is how you unfold it. Like Zach, right out of the chute, you mentioned Young Adults Today podcast. That's for the leader. And then you mentioned FYI, that's for the young adult. So there's two facing sides of our ministry, even though it's like 7-8 months in, where we're still holding it all loosely. We're still, getting started in a lot of ways, but we know that we're called to reach young adults for Christ in our world today. And so we want to provide resources for them.
Mm-hmm.
We want to provide relationships that can last a lifetime. And we want to provide rallying points.
Mm-hmm.
One of those things that we do is we teach, we preach, we travel the state, the country, and the globe of just preaching and sharing the gospel with 18 to 30-year-olds. We have the FYI podcast, and I'm pumped for May 12th through 14th. We will have our third annual weekend for young adults. So that means people from across the state of Minnesota, the Midwest, even the country in the US. We just need more opportunities for community building, not less. And so we have the weekend. Again, there'll be hundreds of young adults coming from 50 plus different churches. Some young adults are just checking things out. And so that is to reach young adults in our world today. And then part of the other side is the Young Adults Today podcast. It's the leader conference that we just had March 3rd and 4th, or March 2nd and 3rd. And that's equipping the church leader, the pastor, the volunteer, the intern to say, look, here's insights on millennials, here's insights on Gen Z.
Right.
And we want to help you reach young adults in your world, in your community, on your campus. And so we have coaching communities for leaders as well, and just webinars, trainings, books, blogs, resources, and we want to help people and multiply our leadership in the process.
Yeah, that's so awesome. And so obviously, you guys have literally dedicated your entire life to young adult ministry. Like, even just as I'm hearing you both talk about it, this is what you guys are so passionate about. But the question I have is, what is it about young adults that is so important? Like, why do you see young adult ministry and really focusing on young adults as important as you see it, so that you're giving as much effort and as much attention to it as you are?
Yeah, Zach, that's a great question. I think for us is realizing that young adults aren't going anywhere. Babies are being born every single second, minute of the day, however many seconds apart, and really realizing that if we don't do it and say yes to what God's put on our heart, who will?
Yeah.
And we realize that God has lent us an idea, and if we don't utilize it and do it to the fullest, like he's going to give it to somebody else. He doesn't give us ideas, he lends us ideas, and he'll find somebody else to fill a void. So it's just us being obedient, saying yes. And I think it really hits home, I think, for both Josiah and myself, is to realize and recognize the 18 to 30-year-old. Those are some of the most pivotal decision-making points in your life that are going to affect you 40 years and beyond. Whether you're going to go to school, get married, date somebody, get that first job, buy a house, get divorced, maybe have kids, like whatever those decisions are, if they don't have people and safe places to process those 12 years of life, they're looking to the world to do it. It's kind of like, if I'm not going to raise my children, somebody else is. If I'm not going to monitor their screen time, then the TV is going to raise them. So if we're not providing outlets and opportunities for young adults who are searching and asking proper questions, but if they don't feel like they have a place to unpack those questions, they're just going to go to Google, they're going to go to the culture, they're going to go to the worldly culture. But if we point them to the Word of God and to the heart of Christ, to get plugged into a community and to a church, like, how can we see the world changed around us? And I think for Josiah and myself, that's when our lives were radically changed. Like, we were called into ministry in our 20s. We were like living fully devoted to God in our 20s. We felt the spark in our hearts separately, even before we had gotten married. And then we got together and we got married. We're like, oh my gosh, like God's just doing so much more than we could ever dream, ask, or imagine. And we've only been married for 5.5 years. So to know what he's going to do beyond that, I think it sparks our heart to reach the next generation, to be like, who do we wish we would have had in our 20s that could have spoken life into us, mentored us, discipleshiped, called us out of our garbage, or helped us redirect according to the Word of God. So that's how I would unpack that. What would you say?
I would just add, like, look, it said that the 4 years of the university moment impact the next 40 and beyond. And so we want to park at that intersection where, and young adults have told us this, Zach, that they've said that, look, we're asking questions that the church isn't answering. And that if we're not careful then as the church, then we will present answers to questions that young adults aren't asking, things of faith, life, adulting, relationships, finances. Life is hard. Adulting is challenging. Things like mental health, racial tensions, biblical literacy, the idea of moral relativism. There's so many challenges. Young adults want to talk about sex and relationships and politics, all these challenging concepts and tough topics that sometimes are taboo. We would just say, like, look, God's word is battle tested and your questions are welcome. If you're a young adult and you are longing for more in life, you don't need to go and try to clean up your life or leave the church to figure out how to function as an adult. Like, we want to help you. And I think that this is a demographic that's missing. Like, I remember in high school myself, the youth pastor at our church got up and spoke. And Zach, he's like, he quoted a Barna statistic from Dr. George Barna that, 2/3 of young adults who grow up in our churches, in our youth groups, will walk away from the faith or church involvement by the time they're 18. And that's just been a pebble in my sock. And it's like, we've got to do something about that. In my prayer times, in Micah's prayer times, like, I've seen a dorm dream, a vision from God that produces passion in me. And it's tens of thousands of young adults kneeling before the God of heaven, lifting their hands, surrendering their lives to Christ in worship for his glory, for his name, for his renown. And so I think when I see that it's a missing demographic, we're going to do whatever we can to serve this, because our fear would maybe be that young adults would be over-researched and under-reached, overstudied and underserved. And so we want to be really mindful that young adults are on heaven's radar. And if no one's advocating for them, then we want to.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just got to say, how appreciative I have been of young adults today and the ministry that you guys have, because it is truly a calling. No doubt about it. You see that as a calling that you guys have answered, because, I can remember, gosh, I don't know if it's been 4 years now, 3-4 years ago, that I just randomly discovered Young Adults Today, the podcast, way back when, whatever it was, and obviously followed ever since. But that was a huge help even to my wife and I as new young adult pastors, and as we're stepping into that, and then obviously here we are today. But it's like, even today, even since 3 or 4 years ago, whenever I first discovered Young Adults Today, it's like between in that time, I have still never found any other resource such as this one. Like, you guys are almost your own monopoly out there. Like, it's you guys, and I'm not really seeing much of anything else. So it's just incredible what you guys are doing and what you are offering, because it is such a gap in the church world that it's being neglected, in the church. For all of the years of church history, every church has a kids ministry, every church has a youth ministry. You've got senior adults, you have all of these things, but then the young adults are always the ones that are just kind of hanging out in limbo. And I think that's a huge contribution as to why we have lost so many young adults in that college age, is because if they've been neglected all of these years by the church, they're asking questions, as you said, but the church has been silent. So this is just such a necessary ministry in the world today, I believe, for sure.
Yes. Thanks for saying that, Zach. We love you and Sarah so much. And you guys are on the front lines, man. You guys are doing it. You're leading even in your living room. You're opening up your lives, your home, your church, your community to young adults. And for that, we just champion you and we celebrate you guys. And thanks for saying that, man. It's truly our joy to serve. And we get so excited to see communities start and strengthen, and that's what you guys are doing.
Yeah. And that's kind of something even that, and I'm going to kind of digress here, but something that my wife and I have become passionate about, is just really seeing more young adult ministries, and seeing churches start those and recognize the importance of that. Not all of that long ago, like maybe I think around October, maybe November of last year, the state youth director in our denomination reached out to us and was like, "Hey, I'm wanting to start a young adult ministry on the state level," and basically asked my wife and I if we'd be kind of the chair people of that ministry. And so we're like, "Yeah, absolutely. We're on board, all of these things." And he reaches back out to us. He's like, "I want to reach out to some other churches, try to find other young adult pastors in the state, and basically create this committee, this steering committee that's going to lead it. But I want your wife and you and your wife to lead it up." And so he came back to us like 2 months later, maybe, and he's like, "I have reached out to every single church in our denomination, over 200 churches within the state of Kentucky." And he said, "You guys are the only church with a young adult ministry in the entire state out of over 200 churches." And that brought a new awareness to us, that, we assumed surely to goodness, because we are most definitely not even the largest church in the state. We're like, well, surely to goodness, there are other churches around us, at least the ones that are bigger than us, that has a young adult ministry. And he said, "I couldn't find anyone." So that brought a whole new awareness to us of how much young adult ministry is lacking. So thank you guys again for what you do, for sure.
Absolutely. Our pleasure.
Yeah. Yeah. So go ahead. Sorry.
No, there's a need. I'm
It
just
is.
like, what you're doing
Yeah.
is so important, and we're with you. And if somebody's listening and you're like, man, how do I get started? Zach can help. We want to help,
Mhm.
and we're cheering for you. Bottom
Yeah.
line, there's a need.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate that so much. So obviously, we've been talking all things young adults, and young adults is what really fires you guys up. And I know you see a lot of things in young adult ministry, traveling around the nation and maybe even the world, seeing all that God is doing and what young adult ministry looks like. But as you, especially probably on the college campus, as you've worked there, you've seen a lot of things and probably gained a better understanding. But whenever you look at young adults, what are some things that you see and maybe hear that is lacking the most from young adults? And what I mean by that, like, is it training? Is it education? Is it someone giving them a chance? Like, what is it that you see in young adults, in general, like from the young adult perspective? What are they lacking? What are they missing?
Oh man. My mind goes 100 different directions, but I think one of the heart cries of the generation that we've been able to be serving is they want to be seen and heard. And when I say that, they want to be celebrated in a sense of not through social media. Like they want a personal relationship with people, with a pastor. They want to feel connected and they don't know how to do it.
Wow.
There's character building that they desire, but they don't know who to ask. They want to personally, they have all these dreams and aspirations, and sometimes they don't know how to channel them. So I think what they're actually asking without asking is saying, I need somebody to believe in me. I need somebody to be real and authentic with me. They don't want the fluff. They don't want the lights, the smoke, the mirrors. They would rather have a stripped down worship set with the cajon and the voices over the production.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that maybe the church and maybe where I've been has been semi guilty of this, but this was to serve the millennial. And that was definitely the hype of church setting versus the hunger. And I think with this generation, what we're seeing and what they're lacking is not the hunger, and not the appetite, but the proper buffet to sit at to receive truth, the word of God, encouragement, a life coach, a pastor, somebody who's going to disciple them, somebody who's going to mentor them, somebody who's going to believe in their dream that is bigger than themselves. So I think it's not that they lack the charisma, it's that they lack the wisdom, insight, and knowledge of how to apply what's been birthing inside of them. And they just don't know how to channel that. And that comes through maybe as negative to some, but inspires me because I'm like, wow, you have character, you're building in the grit area, and you just don't know how to apply it. It's like a horse who has all this horsepower that doesn't know how to control themselves. They're just like running around in the stall.
Yeah.
So that's one side of it. The other side of it is, it's kind of like the horse analogy. I'd say I would much rather say whoa and pull back on some people in the next generation. Like, whoa, like just time out. Like, did the God say that? Or you just, jumping the gun here versus giddy up. And I think that there are elements and there are always people in every generation. So I'm not just saying this is Gen Z, this is millennials, this is all of them, where it's like you have the people who you can't get out of mom and dad's basement and like there's no excitement, there's no like zeal for life. And then you have the people who are overly achieving and overly zealous, but they don't know what to do with it all. So it's like you're in this zoo and there's like a circus going on. It's like, okay, can we help them tame their hearts and come alongside them as people, pastors, a sounding board, or a person that can open up doors? So I think there's a lot of character development in the stage that they're currently in, but they don't always know who to rely on or who they can rely on to help them do that. So that's a long, crazy answer, but that's how my mind literally went 1,000 different directions.
It's interesting you say that because you noticed, 5 years ago already, that there was 4 things that young adults weren't doing at the time.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Oh man. I think this has been my heart's cry for the next generation is praying, journaling, fasting, and reading the word of God. Like those are 4 things that as believers that we cling to each and every single day. And they're examples in the Bible of every single aspect of those. And what are we doing with that? So it's really understanding that there's a time to wait. There's a time to rest. There's a time to work. And I think so many times we get that mixed up. So actually out of all those things, I actually wrote a journal and a book to help tame the single young adult heart, because singleness is not celebrated in the church. It's marriage, it's children. So you have 18 to 30-year-olds who are walking around saying, I'm single and I feel like there's no place for me. I'm 22 and I don't have it all together. I'm 29 and I'm not married yet. Is there a place for me? So I wrote a journal that's specifically designed to do those 4 things that I said, in addition to becoming the person that they need to become if they desire marriage someday. So it's bringing Christ back into the center of their singleness, so they are ready for marriage and a family someday, which does bring the biblical principles and stuff. So I know that I needed that to tame my heart. Otherwise, the world was going to get it. So I had to invite God into that equation. So sorry, that's a long answer. Any thoughts?
No, I love it. I love it. And that is the Worth the Wait journal, right? That you're thinking about. So that's an incredible resource for the listener to grab a hold of, especially if you are single, or maybe you're leading a young adult ministry and there are those who are single under your ministry. Grab that, use that as a resource, a small group, setting, or whatever the case may be. But yeah, no, I totally agree. I think a lot of what has happened is the culture at large has almost put this negative connotation on Gen Z and millennials. They've kind of created that. And because they now have a bad taste in their mouth with Gen Z and millennials, they've kind of tossed them to the side and neglected them. And one thing that I've said so many times about Gen Z and millennials is, the culture has blamed for whatever characteristics they put upon Gen Z and millennials. But in all reality, like, you always have to go back to the generation before that, because someone raised this generation, right?
Exactly.
So it's like, okay, well, usually it's the ones that are pointing fingers that were also the ones raising that generation. So it's like, okay, so now we need to take some parenting lessons and some parenting advice and these other things like that, because, obviously there were things missed. You guys say this about Gen Z and this about millennials. So obviously this was missed in even raising these individuals as children. But still yet, I find, like you said, yeah, there are those who, they're in the basement playing video games, you can't get them out. But on the flip side of that, there are so many young adults who are so intelligent and full of life and are hardworking and will just absolutely entrepreneurs. More people are creating businesses and becoming their own bosses and opening organizations and all of these things more than ever before. And speaking of Barna, there was a recent Barna study even regarding the church, that millennials are the most highest church attenders out of all the other generations. And that used to be the opposite. Pre-COVID, it was the opposite. Millennials were the lowest church attending generation, and now they're the highest. So they have come into the church post-COVID. They are in the church, they are here, and they are ready to be received. As we've talked about, they are ready for whatever we have for them. And so if we are not careful, what can happen is we will miss this moment in time when the millennial generation and even Gen Z is in the church. They are active, they are there. We're not even having to pull them in as much. We still do, but they're there already. But if we're not careful, we'll miss the opportunity, and we will see them. I believe they could walk away later in life if we don't grab them while we have them and take advantage of them, mentor, bring them in, answer the questions that they have, and make sure that we are stewarding this opportunity that we've been given. So
that's right. It's good.
Yeah. So speaking of books, we'll kind of hop off that, and because Josiah, you recently wrote a book titled Fulfill Your Purpose in Your Generation. And in that book, you really talked about what church leaders can do to engage millennials and Gen Z, and what that next generation is looking for. And that was really primarily in chapters 2 and 4 that I'm kind of referring to about. But can you talk about that a little bit more? What can church leaders do to engage millennials and Gen Z? And then what is the next generation looking for? Can you talk about that a little bit?
For sure. Fulfill your purpose in your generation comes from Acts 16:33, which talks about David. And it summarizes King David's entire life, his entire leadership, from shepherd to playing the harp before Saul, who is tormented by evil spirits, to slaying Goliath, to becoming a king, to having, all this lifetime of leadership and patience in the process. But it says that he fulfilled the purpose that God had for him in his generation.
So good.
And I think for the listener, for the leader, at least for me in my own life, like that's one of the bullseyes is, did I fulfill the purpose that God had for me in my generation? And that's the importance of this conversation, and a lot like it, and kudos to you for tuning in to the Catalyst for Change podcast. This is a place where you can discover that purpose that God has for your life and whatever it might be. And for me, I know it's along these lines. And in chapter 2, I really was like gut level honest about why are churches struggling to minister to young adults. You look at 200 plus churches in your state, Zach, and the 384,000 churches across America. I wonder if it isn't about 1 to 200 ratio. I wonder if it isn't. I don't know. I don't know if there is that research, but it just seems like young adults are missing. And part of it, I think, is like they need more opportunities for community. We'll get into that in just a second. But I unpack 6 reasons that churches struggle to minister to the next generation. The first is the experience that we're asking young adults to come to is a lot more of passive observation than active participation. And this is a generation that's saying, put me in, coach, I'm ready to play. I can start a business, but I can't make a difference in my church. The second is our approach sometimes is like program versus a person, people, personal touch, personal pastor, personal relationship. The third is like, if we're not careful, our focus as the church becomes inward versus outward. And this is a cause-driven generation that at times is disconnected with the cause-driven organization of Christ's bride, the local church. And if we're not careful, the fourth is that we emphasize size over significance. So how are we measuring success? It should be impact. It should be really, and again, if we're not careful, the experience for those checking things out is a lot more judgmental than accepting. And the last is our communities are closed rather than opened. And I'm really hopeful. So before you shut me down and be like, look, hang on. I am tremendously optimistic. I think that, Micah, you touched on it, that there is a hunger among Gen Z that I haven't seen. There's the Asbury revival. There's a widespread acceptance to the movie Jesus Revolution. And I'm just asking the question, what if the next Jesus Revolution began with Gen Z?
Yeah.
And so I think that we as church leaders can, and in our companies, in our organizations, maybe one of the things you're dealing with is friction among the generations versus a diversity. And I think that what we can do to engage millennials, to mobilize Gen Z, is first of all to pray urgently and expectantly for young adults. There's a gal named Henrietta Mears, who one author said her influence has lived on more than 100 years. She had in her young adult ministry in the 1940s at Hollywood First Presbyterian Church, Billy Graham, Bill Bright, Ronald Reagan, and many others. And her influence is still living on. And her prayers had power and continue to become answered even beyond her time. So what are the prayers that we're willing to pray? I think second is start personal. Like, who's a young adult that you can text right now? Like, hey, I was just listening to a podcast. I was watching an episode of a podcast and I thought of you. And I'm just grateful for you. And I see God's hand on your life. Can you text the young adult as the challenge for this podcast, but pursue a personal relationship with the next generation? Maybe grab coffee, invite them to your office, go out to lunch, do what my pastor did and open your home up to young adults for a barbecue, for a grill out this summer. I think third is, rather than expecting young adults to come to us, what if we go where they are? The fourth is pour out your cup intentionally. This is, I'm sure we can talk more about mentoring if you want to. And I think that fifth, if you are trying these things and you feel like you're not seeing the results, don't give up. Albert Einstein, one of my favorite quotes of all time, he says that he wasn't a genius. It's just that he stuck with problems longer. Angela Duckworth says that we don't have a passion problem. We have a perseverance problem. And grit is measured as passion multiplied by perseverance. And I think that our opportunity is to pioneer creatively. Just be creative. Offer young adults, hand over the keys to the social media accounts to young adults. You'll be really surprised. And then the last charge would be to prophetically speak to potential. What do you see as possible in the next generation? And then call it out.
It's good.
Yeah, I love that. Now, and obviously you guys have spent a lot of times on the college campus, and just young adults in general, but do you think that a lot of those principles, if not all, could also actually transcend, from not only the church world, but even into the workplace and the marketplace? Like, I feel like a lot of these same principles are not just church specific, but in all reality, like if you are a Christian leader, maybe you are a supervisor or a manager or a business owner, an entrepreneur, like these same principles, even though you may not be looking for young adults to pour in from a spiritual aspect as much, but even finding those people in your workplace and following these principles to find those right young adults and to really seek out young adults to bring into your workplace. Because as I said earlier, there are so many young adults out there that are absolutely brilliant. They are hardworking. They will just bring something totally new and creative to your workplace. And, more than ever before, like you said, diversity, that's being pushed in the workplace, a diverse workplace. And I believe that finding young adults to bring into your workplace would just completely change the dynamic of your company 100%. So.
Well, and one of my mentors, actually my pastor, read my book and he called me. And he's moved to another state and he's, retired a few years ago. And he goes, Josiah, great book, love it, keep going. He goes, but these tips, these steps, they actually are intergenerational. This would apply to not only, like you said, church and workforce and marketplace and mission field, but he's like, these are actually things that would help every generation. And I'm like, I think you're right.
Yeah, that's so awesome. I agree with him. Also, I concur with that. So let's talk about mentorship real quick, and we'll kind of work on closing out here. But what advice would you give to someone who is wanting a mentor but doesn't have one, and then two, maybe to someone who desires to be a mentor but doesn't currently have someone that they're mentoring? What kind of advice would you give to someone like that?
Ooh, should I take the first part of that question?
Do it.
Okay. I would say if you are someone wanting a mentor but do not have one, number one, I would say find somebody who you admire that is doing what you want to do well. That could be leading a business, that could be their prayer life, that could be leadership, that could be parenting, that could be dating well. Find somebody who is doing what you want to do well and they're stable. Second thing I say, find somebody who is willing to pour into you, somebody who has the quality and the time, not just time and quality, but they're quality people that have the time willing to give. Because I'd say that there's nothing more discouraging than having somebody like myself who's uber eager, but the person I'm asking may not be in a season right now for it. But just pursuing those people, because I guess what I've come up against is many people are fearful of asking someone. They might admire somebody from afar and say, it took me 5 years to ask them to mentor me. And I'm like, well, how did they respond after you asked them after these 5 years? They're like, they were delighted. So don't say no for someone that you're really interested in getting to know and to hear their story. So to decrease your fear and increase their curiosity of who you are, hey, I really admire Pastor Vicky, your parenting and prayer life. Can you help me grow in this area of my life? And here's why I admire this. This is what I've seen, XYZ. Can I take you out for coffee for 1 hour and just, pull questions and just ask you? And when I say, I want to encourage you, if you're looking for a mentor, when you admire something about someone, you're giving them permission to call out you in that specific area, to call you out and to call you up, whether you're in the marketplace and you want to learn, or if you're in the ministry, whatever that is, whatever you're wanting to grow, be aware. There's a reason why you're asking them, right? You're obviously falling short in this area, but you're wanting to grow. There's room for you to grow, and you need to be mindful. Like, I'm willing to get imparted some wisdom here. But also with that, you don't find one mentor for your entire life. Meaning, I'm not going to give you my spiritual growth. I'm not going to give you my prayer life, my parenting, my marriage, because I admire yours. You're not going to find someone who has all these things going on. So whatever one area you want to focus in the season that you're in, find that person that you admire, ask them, say, hey, for the next 6 months, can we meet X amount of times? I just want to learn how to do this better. And I think that decreases anybody's fear, but piques their curiosity, because there's something that you have to offer or that you're wanting imparted to you, but you're not going to waste their time. So come with your questions, come with your intentions, and come with a timeline, because you're not going to mentor them until Jesus comes or you retire from that company 30, 40 years. Like, put an end date and say, hey, at the end of 6 months, hey, I've really enjoyed this. Could we continue this maybe once a month for the next 6 months instead of twice a month, or whatever it is? So putting those limits on there. And you should also fear them. You should fear them in a sense of, if it's an accountability partner specifically for purity, I don't want to have to air out my dirty laundry in front of you. And so I'm going to live a purer life. So whatever those things are, I think it's important to admire something about them that they're doing well. And don't be afraid, because they're probably honored that you're going to ask, or that you're asking. They're honored. And people of high caliber and people who are succeeding in life actually make time and have time more than the person who's just wondering and wandering around. So
My gosh, this is a question of a generation, it would seem, of like, I'm
Mhm.
looking for a mentor, but I don't know who to ask. And I think then also, if we're not careful, that I can fall into this category where I'm a mentor hog, or I'm an information hog, and I need to share what I've learned with others deliberately.
Yeah.
And so I would just say everything that Micah said is so good. And I see in my orbit 100 young people who are, maybe more, but I know first names of at least 100 young adults who want a mentor. And then I look at the people of knowledge and wisdom, let's just say 55 plus, who are in our orbit too, who are a qualified mentor. And it's like, they're just waiting to be asked. And so a few things that I've done is recognizing who you're talking to in advance and how can you get in their orbit. Are they speaking at a business leaders lunch? Show up, buy your ticket, take notes, ask questions. You might need to follow up through their admin. I have one mentor who for 12 years, we've met every year at least once, maybe twice a year, but I know their admin system, and they have an assistant, executive assistant, and I email her, I set things up, she puts it on the calendar, I come with my questions, I set the agenda, I lead up, and then he knows that I'm not here to mess around. I'm not going to waste time in anything he said as a challenge to me. I'm going to take notes and I'm going to put it into action. And so I think it's just like letting somebody know, like, we have a business coach. And so a bit of a mentor. Well, the day before, I know that they travel, we travel. And so we just sent a 1-page, here's our mission, here's our vision, here's our strategy, here's our 3 top goals, here's our 3 top challenges. And so we only get 30 minutes of their time. But are we ready to work with what they have? Because actually in the world of mentoring, 15 minutes is a long time. 30 minutes is a long time. But did you show up prepared?
Yeah.
Did you show up with questions? And then are you ready to, like, okay, I got some work to do. And that's what you do. And so I think it's just like, but be bold. It's like dating a little bit. I know that's a weird illustration, but it's like somebody's got to lead, somebody's got to ask. And if we don't have a mentor, it's not going to be because we didn't ask.
Right. It's good.
Yeah, so good. Thank you for your input on that. Because I really believe that is something that a lot of people, and young adults, but people in general, really desire, especially those who are leading and want to be better and do better. They're looking for a mentor, or there are even those who are that want to be a mentor and offer their advice. So thank you guys so much for that. A lot of great wisdom and insight there. Well, we are rounding the end of our time together, but before we end out, Josiah, Micah, what is one final word of encouragement that you would like to leave us with today?
Oh, I love encouragement. And I've been the beneficiary of encouragement that sometimes just the right word strikes me at just the right time. And it encourages my spirit so much. So I don't want to be weird. I just want to invite the Holy Spirit to speak through Micah, to speak through myself, and Zach, to speak through you, to encourage, to uplift the person's head who's listening. And I think what I've just sensed on my heart is to memorize, to meditate, to allow my thoughts to be disrupted a little bit, and to just kind of do an inventory of what I'm thinking about. And if it's downward spiral, dark thoughts, discouragement, I've got to get out of that cycle somehow. And so for me, what that looks like is Romans. Paul writes about the renewing of our mind. And so I want to encourage the listener today to renew your mind, to look to the hills, and not only the hills, to the maker of the hills. Where does your help come from? And I really believe it's the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He's with you. He's for you. And most specifically, I think that you're going to need to find a verse. You're going to need to find a scripture, something to hold on to for hope. And one of them for Micah and I know is 1 Thessalonians 5:24. So I face a challenge. I'm discouraged. But then I look to 1 Thessalonians 5:24 and I look, wow, the one who calls you is faithful and he will also do it. So is it my faithfulness? No. Is it my good works? No. But the one who calls you, Jesus, he's faithful. He's going to do it. And so it might be that verse. It might be Psalm 121. It might be Romans 12:2. But you've got to find a fighter verse. John Piper calls it. Like, you've got to find something that encourages you, that strengthens you in the Lord. You can't look to us or to Zach for that. You've got to look at, how can I encourage myself?
That's good. Well, I think mine maybe sounds more cheesy, but I felt like when you asked this, Zach, was love well and lead well. And I think love well means learning how to love others as Christ has loved us, in addition to extending grace to yourself as a leader, as a pastor, and extending grace to others. I think grace is something that I like score very low on, and God's just really working on me on that. So I just don't know if that's a personal conviction, but just like extending grace where grace is needing to be extended to yourself, whether it's your past, present, maybe something in the future that you're going to like, oh my gosh, I got to extend myself grace for whatever, fill in the blank. And lead well, I think, is the other part of that. And it's dream bigger, set goals, pray audacious prayers.
Come on.
If you want to see some change in your life, then you need to dream bigger. And it's not doing more. Dreaming bigger does not equal doing more. It's focusing on the right thing in the season that you're in, stewarding the things that are before you that God has placed in your hands or on your lap or around the table or in your business, whether that's people, projects, positions, whatever that is. So I would just say love well, lead well, and ask me tomorrow. It'll be something different, but that's what it is in this very moment.
I love it. I love it. That's so awesome. Well, Josiah, Micah, genuinely, thank you so much for your time today. I don't take it for granted at all. I appreciate it more than you could ever know. If any of the listeners would like to connect with you all on social media or learn more about Young Adults Today, how could they go about doing that?
Oh my gosh, I think that we are the only Josiah Kennealy and Micah Kennealy. And then our website and social media is actually really simple: www.youngadults.today. And across all social media platforms, it's youngadults.today. But Zach, you and Sarah, we would consider friends. We are so grateful for you. We love this resource and your book, and excited because the work you're doing is so significant, and we can't wait to see what God has, because it's the best is yet to come.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much. We genuinely love you both and appreciate you more than you all know. Well, that's a wrap for today's episode. So thank you for tuning in to the Catalyst for Change podcast, where we help leaders lead better. I'm Zach, your host, and we will see you again next week.